after after e4, white can reply in a number of ways, and the main continuation here is d3, directly attacking this e4 pawn. But before going into the d3 variation, let's look here at what other moves black has after e takes d5. Now, first of all, of course, as you all may have noticed, this pawn on e5 is under attack, and if black doesn't do anything about it quick, white is going to capture. But as we have learned so far, the main idea behind playing a gambit is not to go for the material or to secure material, but instead it's rapid development, opening up the files and looking for tactical and positional play. One of the continuations here is, instead of e4, it's c6. And so in a very systematic way, black is offering another pawn to white. And if white takes, then of course knight takes. Now this knight is very active here, and at some point when the e5 pawn is taken, this knight can jump into the ideal square of e5, which is a central square for black in this position. If, for example, white does not accept this pawn, that could become very dangerous for white if he chooses to take this pawn instead on e5, f takes e5, because the idea of the flank attack is very alive once again and has the same variation lines. Queen h4, and black has to do something about it very quick because next check is going to be from the e file. So d takes c6 is one of the main continuations. Knight takes c6 and knight f3. If, for example, white chooses here to play bishop b5, pinning this knight against the discovered check, then black simply plays bishop c5, which is the key idea in Falkbeer's Gambit, and the idea is to prevent white's king from castling. This square is, well, I would say, one of the most important squares in the Falkbeer Gambit game, because this is where black has to develop his bishop, attacking the a7 g1 diagonal, and preventing the white king from castling. So if white plays bishop b5, then we simply develop our bishop to c5, the ideal square. Knight f3, bishop g4, pinning the knight. c3, e4. Queen a4. The idea here is to take with a check, and when this pawn takes back, the queen takes with a check. But e takes f3. I think white is, one step behind black here in this variation. So e takes f3. And now suddenly the threats are very real, because very soon this king here is going to castle towards the g square, and the rook is coming into play. The white king cannot castle because, note, this square is eyed by the bishop on c5. Bishop takes c6, and well, it's not even forced for black to recapture with the pawn, because pay attention here. When the queen captures back on c6, the queen will have access on this diagonal, and thence this pawn can be hit in some lines. So king f8, the king moves to f8 square. There are no other threats left really. d4, trying to block this square, but really too late. Queen e7, check. King f1. And now it's mate. It's mate for white's king. Queen e2, check. King g1, king g2, checkmate. And instead of king f1, if white's king moves to king f2, then queen e2 check, king g3, queen takes g2, king h4, bishop e7, checkmate. So I would say knight f3 is a better continuation for white instead of bishop b5. After knight f3, black would simply push the pawn up to e4 because the pawn is under attack. Knight e5, bishop c5. Again, developing this bishop on this square is extremely important in Falkbeer's Gambit lines. c3. The idea behind c3, and it's a main idea for white in these lines, is to push this pawn up, thence blocking the axis of this bishop on this diagonal. Knight f6, d4, e takes d4 en passant, knight takes c6, bishop takes c6, bishop takes d3, castle kingside. And there are lots of confusing arrows here, but if we pause and for a moment look at both black's and white's position, we can clearly see that black is in a much better position. So queen c2, perhaps the only good move for the queen, threatening check on h7 at some point. Not right now because the knight is guarding that square. Rook e8, check, bishop e2, and bishop g4. So there are lots and lots of problems for white here, and it's totally incomprehensible how white would go about solving all those problems. You've got to be a very strong player, like for example Blackburn, who's won lots of games in Falkbeer's Gambit, playing with white pieces. You have to be really strong player to actually counter all these dangers, all these attacks and tactical ideas that are present on board for black. So once again, knight f3, and after knight f3, e4, knight e5, bishop c5, c3. And if instead of c3, white goes knight c3, then queen d4, very strong move threatening checkmate on this square here, f2. Queen e2, only available move perhaps, knight f6, totally destroying white's possession. So c3 is a better move, knight f6, d4, e takes d3, knight takes c6. Instead, if knight takes d3, then castle, bishop e2, rook e8, knight d2. Remember, white's king cannot castle because this square is still eyed by the dark squared bishop, bishop g4. Very problematic once again. So knight c6, knight takes c6, better move, bishop takes c6, bishop takes d3, castling, queen c2, and instead if king f1, then queen e8, and problems, lots and lots of problems for white once again. So queen c2, better move, rook e8, check, bishop e2, king f1, queen e7, or knight g4 can also be played in some variations. And queen e2 can be a continuation, and then bishop g4 is ultimately coming.